Attention! Are you ready to witness the fall of a king and the rise of a queen? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell. The Wallflower's revenge. He owned the skyline, but she owned the truth. He was the master of the city's skyline, yet he couldn't stand the sight of his own wife. Julian Black, an industry titan, saw Audrey Vance as nothing more than a necessary, but deeply embarrassing, part of a corporate merger. He called her plain, a ghost in his golden mansion, a wallflower he actively hid from the public eye. But a ghost can still hear. And after one final crushing insult, Audrey decided the wallflower was about to bloom. She embarked on a secret transformation, preparing for one single night, the Zenith Gala, to show her husband and the world exactly who they had underestimated. The marriage deal. Blackwood's asset. Julian Black had not married a woman. He had acquired a crucial asset. Audrey Vance was the biological key to the successful merger between Blackwood Holdings and Vance Pharma, a deal brokered by their fathers on a golf course years before either of them had a say in the matter. The pact was unbreakable. The union of their companies would be sealed with the union of their children. Julian gained controlling shares of a pharmaceutical empire, and Audrey gained the Blackwood surname and a cage, albeit a golden one. The penthouse on Park Avenue in New York City was less a home and more a museum of Julian's success. It was a cold expanse of marble, glass, and steel, with panoramic views of a city that adored him. And in this vast manifestation of his power, Audrey was the ghost. She was quiet, discreet, and in Julian's cutting opinion, painfully plain. She had intelligent hazel eyes that saw everything, but she kept them lowered. Her ash-brown hair was often pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and her wardrobe consisted of a rotation of beige, gray, and navy cardigans, and unassuming skirts that seemed designed to make her disappear into the expensive wallpaper. Julian was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, with sharp, dark features, a physique sculpted by personal trainers, and a collection of Savile Row suits. He commanded attention wherever he went. He thrived in the spotlight, his name a constant presence in the pages of Forbes and Vogue. His wife, however, was his secret shame. In the 3 years of their marriage, he had never willingly taken her to a major public event. On the rare occasions when her presence was unavoidable, he introduced her with a dismissive hand gesture. "This is Audrey," before immediately redirecting his attention to someone more important, more beautiful, more interesting. The casual cruelty was not always so public. More often, it was a daily series of small, sharp cuts. "For God's sake, Audrey, are you wearing that again?" he scoffed as she came down for breakfast, her simple gray dress a stark contrast to his immaculate Tom Ford suit. "You have a limitless black card. Try to look like you're married to me, not my accountant." She would only murmur a quiet, "I'm comfortable," which only seemed to enrage him further. "Comfort is the luxury of people who don't have to be looked at," he would retort, without even looking up from his tablet. His cruelty was casual, an unthinking byproduct of his immense ego. He never considered her feelings, because to him, she wasn't a whole person. She was a contractual obligation, a piece of living furniture. He had no idea she had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with a finance degree, that she spoke 3 languages fluently, or that she found solace in reading Russian literature in its original text late at night when the cavernous penthouse was silent. He never asked. 2. The final insult. Wrapping paper. The Zenith Gala, the upcoming Metropolis Charity Gala, was the peak of the New York social calendar, an event Julian considered his personal stage. This year, Blackwood Holdings was the lead sponsor. His attendance was non-negotiable, and to his deep irritation, so was his wife's. Board members, particularly the older, more traditional ones from the Vance side, had been making comments about her absence from previous functions. It looked bad, they said. It looked, to be specific, like trouble in the billionaire's perfect marriage. He brought it up one evening, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. "The gala is the 1st of next month. You'll be coming with me." Audrey looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. Oh, she hadn't known. "Well, now you do," he said curtly. "My PR team believes it's imperative that we present a united front." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I've asked my assistant to contact a stylist. Her name is Celine. She'll be here tomorrow at 10. For God's sake, listen to her. Don't argue. Just let her turn you into something presentable." He didn't see the flash of hurt in her hazel eyes. Or perhaps he did, and simply didn't care. To him, this was a problem to be managed. His simple wife needed to be polished, like tarnished silver, before she could be displayed. "Of course, Julian," she said, her voice a soft whisper, the vast room, easily swallowed. He nodded curtly, satisfied. He drank his scotch and left the room without another word, leaving her alone with the city lights and the weight of his casual disdain. Audrey closed her book, the words on the page blurred. She walked to the window, looking at the endless stream of bright, bustling lights. Everyone down there lived a life full of choices and feelings, of heartbreaks and joys. She was up here, higher than all of them, in a silent, sterile palace, more isolated than any of them could imagine. For 3 years, she had endured. For 3 years, she had made herself small and invisible, hoping that if she drew no attention, she could at least find peace. But his demand that she be presentable was not just an insult. It was an order to be a dollar store accessory on his arm for one night. He didn't want her. He wanted a sanitized, approved version of her. And as she looked at her faint reflection in the glass, a quiet, cold resolution began to form deep in her heart. He wanted something presentable. Fine. He would get it. But it wouldn't be on his terms. It would be on hers. Later that week, the final straw came. It wasn't a direct hit, but a glancing one, overheard by chance, and all the more painful for it. Julian was hosting an informal business dinner in his private dining room. Audrey, as usual, had made herself invisible, retreating to the library adjacent to the space. The heavy oak doors were almost closed, but a small gap remained, and the voices, lubricated by expensive wine, drifted through. She heard the booming laughter of Marcus Cross, Julian's main business rival. Cross was everything Julian was, but with a veneer of old money charm that Julian's new money aggression could never replicate. Their rivalry was legendary in New York financial circles. "I have to say, Julian," Cross's smooth voice drifted through the door, "you've played the long game brilliantly. Securing Vance Pharma was a masterstroke. Too bad about the accessories." Julian's friends laughed. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. She knew they were talking about her. "She is a means to an end, Marcus. Nothing more." Julian's voice was slick with condescension. He was performing for his audience. "The deal stands. The wife is useful for maintaining the family connection to the board. But let's be honest, she's a drag. A complete zero in the charisma department. Keeping her out of the spotlight is a full-time job." Someone else chimed in. "Come on, Julian. At least you could have married one with some sparkle." "The wrapping paper is irrelevant," Julian replied, and the finality of his tone was like a physical slap. "I bought the company, not the wrapping paper. As long as she stays quiet and doesn't embarrass me, she's fulfilling her part of the bargain." The laughter that followed was a physical blow. Audrey shrank, clapping her hands over her mouth to stifle a gasp. A drag. the wrapping paper. He hadn't just said it to her in a moment of anger. He had told his rival, his friends, as a point of pride. He was boasting about how little she meant to him. In that moment, something inside her didn't just break. It shattered, and the pieces began to reassemble into something new, something hard and sharp. The silent acceptance she had cultivated for 3 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear fury. She had been a ghost in his house, a footnote in his life, a contractual obligation he barely tolerated. No more. She backed away from the door in silence, her movements graceful and sure. She went to her bedroom, the one on the opposite end of the penthouse from Julian's, and sat at her antique desk. She opened a small hidden drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who, before her illness, had been a force of nature, brilliant, elegant, and unapologetically herself. Audrey flipped through the pages until she found the name she was looking for. Isabel Ricci. Rome. Isabel had been her mother's closest confidant, a legendary figure whispered about in the highest echelons of European society. She wasn't just a stylist. She was a sculptor of personalities, an artist who worked not in clay or stone, but in confidence, posture, and presence. She had retired years ago, disappearing from public life to live a secluded life in Italy, rejecting all clients. Audrey picked up her phone. She didn't hesitate. She knew it was a risky move, but the fire Julian had just ignited in her gut burned too intensely to ignore. She wouldn't be presentable. She wouldn't be a doll dressed by his stylist. She would be a masterpiece of her own making. 3. The metamorphosis. The wrapping paper burns. The next day, she dismissed a bewildered Celine, telling her simply that her services were no longer needed. She then informed Julian that she would handle her own arrangements for the gala. He barely looked up from his desk. "Fine. Just don't show up in one of your gray cardigans. I'll be embarrassed enough as it is." He was so confident in his perception of her that he couldn't conceive of her doing anything of significance. His disinterest provided the perfect cover. Isabel Ricci was not what Audrey expected. She wasn't a whirlwind of air kisses and fashion jargon. She was a woman in her late 60s, with deep, penetrating dark eyes, a mane of silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and an aura of absolute authority. She arrived via the service entrance with a single suitcase and surveyed the penthouse with an expression of profound disapproval. "This place has no soul," she declared. "It's a vault with a view. No wonder you hide." Her work began not in a closet, but in Audrey's mind. For the first few days, they didn't look at a single item of clothing. They talked. Isabel made Audrey recount everything: her childhood, her love of numbers and literature, her forgotten ambitions, the slow, crushing weight of her marriage. "You have made yourself invisible as a shield," Isabel concluded one afternoon. "You believe if they don't see you, they can't hurt you. But a shield can also be a cage, Audrey. You've locked yourself inside." The training was rigorous and holistic. Isabel was a drill sergeant, dressed in Dior. They started with posture. "Shoulders back. Your ancestors were not spineless. Walk as if you own the ground you walk on, not as if you are apologizing for taking up space." Audrey spent hours pacing the long hallway with a stack of books on her head until her timid shuffle transformed into a graceful, confident stride. Then came her voice. Isabel made her read poetry aloud, projecting from her diaphragm. "Your voice is a whisper. A whisper is for secrets and prayers, not for the boardroom or the ballroom. Speak as if you expect to be heard." Her soft murmurs slowly gained timbre and strength, becoming measured and clear. The hidden fortune and the enigma dress. As Isabel reshaped her presence, Audrey secretly rebuilt her independence. Years ago, she had inherited a modest but respectable stock portfolio from her grandmother. Julian, after a cursory glance, had dismissed it as pocket money and forgotten about it entirely. But Audrey, with her Wharton education and a brilliant, unexplored financial mind, had been meticulously managing it. In the privacy of her study late at night, she wasn't just reading Tolstoy. She was analyzing market trends, making bold, calculated investments in tech startups and emerging biotech firms. Her pocket money had quietly grown into a substantial fortune, a secret nest egg that gave her a growing sense of power. It was her escape plan long before she knew she was planning an escape. Finally, a week before the gala, Isabel tackled the wrapping paper. They didn't look for trends. They sought a statement. "It is not about being beautiful," Isabel explained, sketching designs in a notebook. "Julian is surrounded by beautiful. It is common. It is cheap. This is about being unforgettable. We will create an enigma when you walk into that room. They must not say, 'She is beautiful.' They must say, 'Who is she?'" They commissioned a dress from a reclusive, avant-garde designer from Antwerp, whose work was closer to art than fashion. It was a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb the light around it, architecturally structured, yet flowing with an ethereal grace. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. It was a dress that did not wear the woman. The woman had to inhabit it. The physical transformation was the final piece. A top-tier hairstylist, sworn to secrecy, was flown in from Paris. He cut her ash-brown hair, layering it to frame her face, and dyed it a warm, deep chestnut with subtle mahogany highlights. A makeup artist, a legend in the editorial world, showed her how to accentuate her high cheekbones and define her large, intelligent hazel eyes, making them the striking focal point of her face. The afternoon of the gala, Audrey looked at her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, yet, paradoxically, the most honest version of herself she had ever seen. The plainness was gone, stripped away to reveal the strength that had been there all along. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, serene determination. Isabel stood behind her, a rare, proud smile on her face. "There you are, darling," she said softly. "I wondered when you would show up." Audrey smiled back, a true, confident smile that reached her eyes. "Julian expects a wallflower," she said, her voice low and resonant. "He's about to get a wildfire." Interactive question. Do you think Audrey's transformation was merely external, or was the internal shift in confidence the most powerful part of her preparation? Comment below. 4. The Gala. The Wildfire. The Zenith Gala was an exercise in ostentatious grandeur. The entrance to the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, was a river of camera flashes and velvet ropes. Julian Black arrived early and alone. He thrived in this environment, moving through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo, the dark fabric a perfect contrast to his ruthless ambition. He greeted politicians, exchanged polite barbs with business rivals, and posed for the cameras with an easy, practiced smile. Several people asked about his wife. "Where is Audrey tonight, Julian?" asked a portly banking CEO. Julian sighed dramatically and dismissively. "Oh, Audrey, you know. She's probably still deciding which shade of beige to wear. She'll be along. Don't worry. I had her thoroughly styled. She might even be recognizable tonight." He winked, and the men around him shared a knowing chuckle. He felt a familiar prickle of irritation. He just hoped she wouldn't actively embarrass him. He poured himself a glass of champagne and stood near the grand staircase, the main entry point to the ballroom where he could hold court. He was engrossed in conversation with Marcus Cross, their talk a polite dance of veiled insults and power plays, when a sudden silence fell over the usually noisy lobby. It wasn't an abrupt quiet, but a growing wave of stillness as conversations broke off and heads began to turn one by one toward the entrance. A murmur of whispers followed. Julian, annoyed by the interruption, looked impatiently toward the staircase. And then he saw her. For a moment, his brain simply refused to process the image. He saw a woman descending the grand marble stairs, and his first thought was that she must be a movie star, or perhaps European royalty he hadn't been briefed on. She moved with a liquid grace, her hand gliding lightly on the railing. The dress, a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk, seemed to absorb the light around her, creating an aura of mystery and power. It wasn't revealing, yet it clung to a surprisingly slender, strong figure. Her deep chestnut hair caught the light, framing a face with sculpted cheekbones and a determined, yet serene expression. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were large, intelligent, and scanned the crowd with a quiet, certain gaze. There was no shyness or apology in them. They held a silent, formidable power. Julian felt a strange, unfamiliar clench in his chest. He narrowed his eyes slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. There was something in the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. Marcus Cross, standing beside him, let out a low whistle. "My God," he murmured, his usual cynical mask dropping for a second. "Now that is a woman, is it? Who is she?" The woman reached the foot of the staircase. The cameras, which had been focused on a famous actress, swiveled toward her in a frantic, unified motion, the sound of shutters clicking like hail. She didn't flinch. She didn't pose. She simply paused, her eyes continuing their quiet survey of the room. And then her gaze landed on Julian. She held his eyes for a single, charged second. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and cold, touched her lips. It was in that smile that Julian's world tilted on its axis. Recognition slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. The air left his lungs. The champagne flute in his hand suddenly felt heavy. Audrey. It was Eleanor, his simple, invisible, beige wife. But it couldn't be. The woman standing before him was a goddess, a queen. She moved with an authority he had never seen. The ash-brown hair was gone. The bland clothing was gone. The downcast eyes and apologetic posture were gone. Every trace of the woman he had so casually ridiculed and dismissed had been annihilated. In her place stood this stunning stranger, who wore his wife's face. "Julian, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus Cross said, a note of amusement in his voice. He followed Julian's stunned gaze, and his eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Wait a minute. Is that Audrey?" Julian couldn't answer. He was completely, utterly mute. His mouth was dry, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, and a strange, terrifying new emotion. Awe. He watched, frozen, as several of the city's most powerful men he had been trying to impress all night, began to move toward her. Their expressions were of admiration and intense curiosity. She greeted them with a subtle nod and a warm yet reserved smile. Her voice when she spoke was not the whisper he was used to, but a low, melodious tone that carried easily. He had wanted her to be presentable. He had wanted her to be an accessory. But this was no accessory. This was a supernova. And she hadn't just entered the room. She had claimed it. The post-mortem. A question of ownership. The rest of the night played out like a fever dream for Julian. He felt as if he had been relegated to the role of spectator in his own event, watching a drama he didn't understand, starring a woman he thought he knew. He saw his wife, this new, incredible Audrey, move through the gala's glittering crowd, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with the composure of a seasoned diplomat. Before he could recover from his initial shock and cross the room to her, she was intercepted by Marcus Cross. Julian watched his jaw tighten as his main rival took Audrey's hand, leaning in slightly to kiss her knuckles in a gesture of old-world gallantry. "Audrey," Marcus said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "I must confess I barely recognized you. You are absolutely magnificent." Julian expected Audrey to blush, to stammer, to shrink under the attention. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you, Marcus. It's amazing what a change of perspective can do." Her response was smooth, witty, and held a subtle double meaning that clearly didn't escape Cross, who laughed appreciatively. Julian headed towards them, a possessive, primal instinct kicking in. This was his wife. What was Cross doing? But as he approached, Audrey turned to greet Robert Delano, the notoriously reclusive tech billionaire. Julian had been trying to secure a meeting with Delano for months. Now his wife was speaking to him as if they were old friends. "Mr. Delano," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I was fascinated by your firm's recent acquisition of the AI logistics firm, Omnicorp. Their predictive modeling is revolutionary, but I imagine the real challenge will be integrating their volatile code base with your existing infrastructure." Delano, a man who notoriously despised small talk, looked at her with genuine surprise and interest. "You follow AI logistics? I follow smart investments," Audrey replied smoothly. "And that was one of the smartest I've seen all year." Julian froze. He had no idea she even knew what AI logistics was. He watched in astonishment as she and Delano engaged in a spirited technical conversation, Delano nodding eagerly. The powerful, the influential, and the socialites around them were drawn into her orbit, not just by her stunning looks, but by the palpable intelligence and confidence she radiated. He felt a hot surge of something ugly and unfamiliar. Jealousy. It was quickly followed by an even more unsettling feeling: irrelevance. She wasn't seeking him out. She didn't seem to need his validation or his presence. She was building her own connections, hogging her own spotlight. He finally managed to corner her near the terrace. "Audrey," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "What is all this? What did you do to yourself?" She turned to face him. Her hazel eyes were cold and direct. The look in them was not that of a wife greeting her husband, but of a stranger assessing an obstacle. "I decided to wear something other than beige, Julian. I thought you'd be pleased." "Pleased? This is a disguise, a ridiculous stunt," he hissed, trying to regain control. He reached out to grab her arm, his old habit of physically directing her kicking in. She stepped back half a pace, just enough for his hand to fall into empty space. The rejection was subtle, but absolute. "Is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or is it possible that the woman you lived with for 3 years was the disguise, and this is the first time you are seeing the real me?" He was stunned. He had no reply. He was accustomed to her complaints, to her silence. This serene, articulate challenge was completely unnerving. "People are watching," he grumbled, trying a different tactic. "You're making a spectacle." "Am I?" She glanced around the ballroom. "The only person I see making a spectacle, Julian, is you. Everyone else seems to be having a wonderful time." She gave him another one of those small, enigmatic smiles. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the curator of the Guggenheim wants to discuss a possible donation. I believe he's a friend of my father's." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone and exposed. The Emperor had no clothes, and for the first time in his life, Julian Black felt foolish. He had spent years mocking the quiet woman by his side, while a queen lay dormant. Tonight she had awakened, and in doing so, had completely rewritten the rules of his world. He was no longer the sun around which she orbited. He was just another planet, suddenly knocked off its axis, watching her chart her own course across the sky. The fear that had been a spark was now a raging fire. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had lost something he didn't even know he had. The confession and the truth unveiled. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing post-mortem. The city buzzed, but not about him or his company's sponsorship. They buzzed about Audrey Blackwood. Society pages, which had never featured her, were now filled with breathless descriptions of the mysterious woman who had captivated the Zenith Gala. Photos of her were everywhere, serene, elegant, and devastatingly stunning. They called her transformation miraculous, dazzling, the debut of the decade. For Julian, every headline was another twist of the knife. He returned to the penthouse after the gala, expecting. He didn't know what. A confrontation, an explanation. Instead, he found nothing. Audrey's room was silent. The door closed. The next morning, she was gone before he woke up. A brief, formal note lay on the marble kitchen island. "I'll be staying at my mother's old apartment in the city for a while. My assistant will coordinate with yours if anything is required." The cold fury that rose in him was a defense mechanism against the deeper, terrifying feeling of complete confusion. This wasn't the woman he married. This wasn't the deal he made. He had to understand. He treated the problem like any business threat. He launched an investigation. His first call was to David Sands, his discreet, ruthlessly efficient head of security. "I want to know everything Audrey has been doing for the last 6 months, he ordered. "Every phone call, every credit card transaction. I want to know who was behind this circus." The first report landed on his desk in 48 hours and only deepened the mystery. There was no registered stylist. The dress had been custom ordered directly from an Antwerp designer, paid for from a private bank account Julian didn't recognize. The hair and makeup artists were freelancers who had signed ironclad NDAs. But one name appeared with intriguing frequency: Isabel Ricci, the legendary image consultant who had disappeared from public life a decade ago. The financial report was even more shocking. David had managed to trace the bank account from which the dress was paid. It was part of a private brokerage account in Audrey's maiden name, Vance, an account Julian had dismissed years ago. He accessed the portfolio, his access as her husband giving him the authority he needed. And his breath caught. It wasn't pocket money. It was a fortune. The initial inheritance, a few million, had been cultivated with astonishing skill. She had invested early in obscure tech firms that had since exploded. She had shorted a failing retail giant months before its public collapse. She had diversified into green energy and pharmaceuticals with the foresight of a seasoned Wall Street predator. Her portfolio had grown exponentially, now rivaling the net worth of some of the men he considered his peers. She was, in her own right, independent and astoundingly wealthy. He felt a wave of vertigo. He had been calling her an accountant while she was quietly playing the market like a virtuoso. He had lectured her about her limited black card while she amassed a fortune he didn't even know existed. The power dynamic he had taken for granted was a complete fiction. She didn't need him. She hadn't needed him for a long, long time. Driven by a new, desperate need for answers, Julian did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He investigated his own past. He called a contact, an old-school private investigator, and asked him to research the Vance family, specifically Audrey's life before their marriage. The story the investigator pieced together was one of silent tragedy. The Vances had once been more than just wealthy. They were socially prominent. But when Audrey was a teenager, her father had become embroiled in a nasty, very public insider trading scandal. Though he was eventually exonerated, the media frenzy was merciless. The paparazzi pursued the family, camping outside their mansion. One particularly aggressive photographer had caused a car accident that severely injured her mother, Catherine, an injury she never fully recovered from, leading to a dependence on painkillers that would eventually contribute to her early death. The trauma had profoundly changed Audrey. She had been brilliant, vibrant, and on the cusp of a shining career. But the predatory nature of the public eye, the way her family was torn apart for sport, had led her to hide. Her plainness, her stillness, her invisibility. It wasn't her nature. It was a fortress. She had deliberately built a shell around herself, a defense mechanism to ensure no one would ever look at her, judge her, or hurt her again. Julian hung up the phone, the investigator's words echoing in the silent office. He felt a deep, wrenching shame. He hadn't just mocked her for being plain. He had mocked her armor. He had belittled the very walls she had built to shield herself from the kind of brutal public world he reveled in. He had been the monster she was hiding from, and he had been living in her house. His phone buzzed. It was an alert from his legal department. Marcus Cross's company, Cross Consolidated, had just filed a formal proposal for a joint venture. It wasn't addressed to Blackwood Holdings. It was a multi-billion-dollar green energy initiative, and the proposal was addressed directly to Ms. Audrey Vance, CEO of EV Capital, the formal name of her private investment firm. Cross hadn't just admired her at the gala. He had recognized her power, and he was now treating her as an equal, a formidable player in a game Julian thought was his own. The final piece of his superiority crumbled. 7. The confrontation and the unclothed truth. Armed with the devastating truth of his own ignorance, Julian knew he couldn't let this play out through assistants and lawyers. He drove to the address on Audrey's note, a classic, elegant brownstone in the Upper East Side that felt a world away from the cold modernity of his penthouse. It felt like her, discreet, solid, and possessing a quiet, hidden strength. She opened the door herself. She wore no evening gown or expert makeup. She was dressed in simple black trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. Yet the timid woman was gone forever. The confidence she had worn at the gala was still there now, a quiet, unbreakable core of her being. She looked at him not with anger, but with a quiet, assessing distance. "Julian," she said, her voice even, "I wasn't expecting you. May I come in?" he asked. The words felt strange, humbling. He had never had to ask permission to enter a room in his own home. She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. The apartment was filled with books, warm wood, and comfortable furniture. It was a home, not a showroom. It was her. He didn't know where to start. The arrogance that had been his default setting all his life had abandoned him. "The gala," he began, his voice rough. "Audrey, He trailed off. She finished for him, an ironic, sad smile on her lips. "That was the point. For one night, I wanted you to see me, to truly see me." "I was a fool," he said. The admission cost him more than any failed business deal. "A cruel, blind fool. I read the reports, Audrey, about your finances, about your family, about what happened to my mother." Her calm expression wavered for a moment, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "You made me investigate. I had to understand," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I had to know who the woman I married truly was. The things I said to you, the way I treated you. I called your shield a weakness because I was too arrogant to see what it was. I am profoundly sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It was genuine, torn from a place of deep shame. Audrey listened, her gaze steady. She walked to a small mahogany desk and picked up a thick manila envelope. She offered it to him. "I am sorry too, Julian," she said softly. "I'm sorry I allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I'm sorry I let my fear dictate my life. I'm sorry that our marriage was nothing more than a cage for both of us." He took the envelope. His fingers felt numb as he opened the flap and saw the legal letterhead. Divorce papers. His heart sank. "No," he whispered. "Audrey, no, I see you now. I swear to God I see you. Let's start over. Let me get to know the real you, the woman who can captivate a ballroom and outmaneuver Wall Street. Let me earn a place in your life." She shook her head, not with malice, but with a soft, final resolve. "This is not punishment, Julian, and it is not a negotiation tactic. It is a declaration. I am no longer the woman who signed that marriage contract. That Audrey Vance is gone. I spent 3 years in your shadow, and I am finally ready to stand in my own." He looked at the papers. Then he looked back at her face, truly seeing the intelligence, the strength, and the resilience etched there. He had owned a diamond and treated it like a common stone, only realizing its value when it was no longer his. The irony was crushing, and the master of acquisitions had failed the most important merger of his life. "Is there no chance?" he asked. His voice cracked with a vulnerability that surprised them both. "The old me would have been afraid to leave," she said, her voice filled with a newfound peace. "The new me is afraid not to. I have a business to run. Marcus Cross just proposed a very interesting joint venture." She allowed a small, confident smile. "I have a life to build. My own life." She didn't ask him to leave, but he knew it was time to go. He stood there for a moment longer, the divorce papers a dead weight in his hand, memorizing the face of the incredible woman he had so carelessly discarded. He had wanted to leave her speechless, but in the end, she was the one who had silenced him. Not with a dress, but with her quiet, unassailable strength. He walked out of her home and drove back to the city, a city that suddenly felt like it belonged more to her than to him. The story hadn't ended. He knew it. But for the first time, he was not the one writing it. Audrey Vance held the pen, and her first chapter was only just beginning. The Horizon of Audrey, Epilogue. 6 months passed. The seasons in New York changed, but the shift in the city's power structure was more dramatic than the changing leaves in Central Park. The name Blackwood still inspired respect in boardrooms, but the name Vance now evoked something more potent: intrigue. Audrey did not return to the golden cage on Park Avenue. The divorce was finalized with a discreet efficiency that was characteristic of her new life. There were no messy tabloid battles or public recriminations. Audrey's terms were simple. She wanted none of Julian's fortune. She only wanted a clean break, leaving her free to continue building her own. This act, more than anything else, solidified her status as a figure of immense, independent strength in the eyes of the public and the financial world. Her firm, EV Capital, moved into a sleek office in the newly developed Hudson Yards district, a space of light, glass, and cutting-edge design. It was the architectural opposite of Julian's opulent, heavy penthouse. Here, she thrived. Her joint venture in green energy with Marcus Cross, dubbed Helios, was a resounding success. They were acquiring land, laying groundwork, and attracting investors drawn not just by the project's profitability, but by Audrey's formidable reputation, her meticulous research, and her ethical investment strategy. Her partnership with Marcus was one of deep intellectual respect. He was a sharp businessman, but he constantly found himself impressed by her ability to see angles he had overlooked, to calculate risks with a quiet precision that bordered on the prophetic. Their meetings were a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, data, and strategy. Meanwhile, Julian Black lived in the echo of his former life. The vast penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like a mausoleum. The silence was immense. He had tried to fill it at first, hosting parties and bringing home the kind of beautiful, shallow women he once preferred. But he found their conversation empty, their laughter irritating. They weren't her. They lacked the depth, the hidden fire, the quiet intelligence he had been blind to for so long, and now craved with a desperate pang. He saw her, of course. It was impossible not to. He saw her on the cover of Forbes, profiled as the quiet titan of Wall Street. He saw paparazzi photos of her leaving a conference in Geneva, looking effortlessly chic in a tailored pantsuit, her expression focused and serene. He saw her being interviewed on financial news channels, speaking with an eloquence and authority that squeezed his heart with a mix of pride and profound loss. One night, he was watching from his car. Stuck in traffic on Fifth Avenue. A digital billboard above him lit up. It was an advertisement for the Helios initiative. It showed a pristine image of a wind farm at sunrise, and at the bottom, the corporate logos, Cross Consolidated and EV Capital, his rival and his ex-wife building the future together. He finally understood. He had spent his life acquiring things, companies, buildings, assets. He had treated Audrey as his ultimate acquisition, and in his arrogance, he had never bothered to look inside the wrapping paper. He had owned a treasure and let it slip through his fingers because he was too foolish to recognize its worth. Julian looked from the billboard, from his name in lights, to his own reflection in the polished window of his limousine. He saw a man who had everything and nothing. He had the money, the power, the skyline, but he was completely, utterly alone. Miles away, in her own office, Audrey was standing by the window, looking at the same city. She didn't see a collection of buildings he owned. She saw a network of opportunities, a future she was building on her own terms. The last 3 years had been a quiet, painful winter. But now it was spring, and everything was beginning to grow. She took a sip of tea, a small, genuine smile on her face, and returned to her work. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. But in her world, it felt like dawn. Final reflection and call to action, closing. The story of Audrey Vance is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true strength is not about the noise you make, but about the changes you inspire. She transformed not only her appearance, but her destiny, proving that self-worth is the most impressive accessory of all. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember that she was always a queen. What part of her transformation did you find most powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more unforgettable stories of resilience and redemption, don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening. Please hit that like button if you believe in the strength of a mother's love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of resilience. She had just given birth, the tender wound of the C-section still aching, when her husband walked in and asked for a divorce, leaving her for another woman. Humiliated, and with the fresh stitches burning, the young mother did something that left everyone speechless. Amelia held her 7-pound newborn close as she slowly made her way down the hospital corridor. Each step was a battle. The C-section wound seared. Her abdomen throbbed with every movement, and the pain forced her to bite her lips to keep from groaning. Still, she tried to smile, because after 6 years of failed attempts, of home remedies and hormone treatments, her dream of motherhood had finally come true. That day, Mark, her husband, didn't come to the hospital. He said he was busy closing a project and that his mother would pick up the baby. Amelia didn't respond. She simply looked down. She was already accustomed to his absence since the 6th month of her pregnancy. At first, it was for work, then for tiredness, and then he simply stopped explaining. She didn't want to reproach him either. She just wanted to go home, cradle her son, and lay him in the small crib they had prepared with so much hope. She thought of that room where she once believed they would build a family. The taxi pulled up in front of the house. Her mother-in-law got out first to open the door. Amelia followed slowly. As she crossed the threshold, the silence surprised her. She expected to see Mark with a smile and open arms, but he didn't appear. Seconds later, the firm sound of heels broke the air. A young woman emerged from the living room. She wore a tight white blouse, a red skirt, and light brown dyed hair. Her perfume was so sweet and penetrating that it filled the entire room. And behind her was Mark. He walked with a chilling calmness. He didn't look at his son, much less at Amelia. He just stopped, and without blinking said, "Mother, this is Clara. This is the woman I love, and I want you to know it right now." The air in the room became so dense it was unbreathable. Her mother-in-law, who had just poured a glass of water, dropped it with a thud. The glass shattered on the floor, but no one moved to pick it up. The young woman stepped forward, a smile on her lips that wavered between courtesy and provocation. "Hello, ma'am," she said with irony as she looked at Amelia. "I just want you to know, this isn't personal. I'm not stealing your husband. I'm just claiming what belongs to me." Her words were like a knife that didn't stab Amelia's chest, but cut directly into the still bleeding wound on her abdomen, making her clutch her son tighter against her chest. Amelia shed no tears. But then, the baby, as if sensing the tension, let out a faint whimper before falling back asleep. The mother-in-law, furious, pointed at Mark. "What are you saying? Your wife gave birth 2 days ago. Her C-section stitches haven't even been removed yet." Mark sighed impatiently, as if the situation irritated him. "Mom, you know we don't work. We got married 6 years ago, and we only just had a child. She's fulfilled her end. Now, I want to free us both." The mistress added, "I don't want her to suffer, ma'am. We're serious, and we don't want to hide anything." Amelia just stared at them, saying nothing. Her legs trembled, her face was pale, and her hands clenched tightly around her bag. A drop of sweat rolled from her temple to her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She looked at Mark, not with reproach or questions, but as if trying to confirm that this was the man she had entrusted her youth to. The mother-in-law sat down, bewildered, neither defending her daughter-in-law nor scolding her son. She opted for silence, leaving each to bear their own mistakes. Amelia shuffled into the bedroom. Each step was a sharp reminder of the wound that hadn't yet closed. She carefully placed the baby in the crib and, with an instinctive gesture, laid her cheek on his forehead to make sure he didn't have a fever. Seeing that he was fine, she whispered a barely audible prayer of thanks to heaven and collapsed onto the edge of the bed. With trembling hands, she changed the blood-stained pad for a clean one. Outside, Mark chatted in low tones with the other woman, as if nothing had happened. Amelia leaned over her son, wrapped him in her arms, and whispered with heartbreaking tenderness, "It's okay, my love. Mommy's here." In the living room, the young woman laughed confidently, talking about her idea of opening a shop. Mark nodded and smiled, but his eyes kept darting towards the slightly ajar bedroom door. His gaze was not one of guilt or doubt, but of an unsettling coldness. Near midday, the young woman stood up. She left a bag of fruit on the table as if it were a polite gesture. "I have to go," she said, smoothing her skirt with feigned elegance. Passing the door to Amelia's room, without even turning her head, she raised her voice. "Rest well. You must be exhausted. Don't worry. What's meant to happen will happen. And with that, she left, leaving behind an intense perfume and another wound that wasn't visible, but hurt just the same. Mark left shortly after, without entering the room or saying goodbye to his son. Amelia stayed by the crib, watching her baby sleep, his tiny hands intertwined. Each tranquil breath of the child was another pang in her heart. That afternoon, the mother-in-law prepared food for 3, but only 2 ate. She and the baby. Amelia said she was tired, and it was true. She only drank water and ate a packet of old crackers from her maternity bag. Amelia lay on her side, stroking her son's hair with her eyes open. She didn't sleep, didn't cry, didn't react. Her mind was empty, save for a phrase that echoed, "I'm not stealing anything. I'm just claiming what belongs to me." But claiming what? That man was never anyone's, she thought. Amelia understood that what she thought was a home was just a temporary stop for a man who never knew how to love. Then, she whispered to her son, "You're all I have, and Mommy will take you far from here." Can you imagine the heartbreak and determination Amelia must have felt in that moment? What would you do if your world crumbled just after bringing a new life into it? Share your thoughts below. 3 days after giving birth, when Amelia still couldn't sit up for more than 10 minutes without feeling dizzy, Mark's mistress returned, this time alone. She entered wearing a fitted moss-colored sweater, a knee-length wool skirt, and short boots, as if she had just come from a shopping mall. She carried a simple but expensive cream handbag. She didn't knock. The mother-in-law, who was hanging clothes in the yard, didn't hear her. The young woman stood in the kitchen as if she knew the place and said in a soft but cutting voice, "Hello, Amelia. I came to see the baby and to leave you a gift." Amelia, lying in bed, held the baby with one hand and a hot water bottle on her abdomen. Her face was pale, her lips chapped, sweat beaded on her forehead. The baby was weak from jaundice. He needed phototherapy lights and breast milk. But Amelia had lost her milk the day before. All night she had a fever from mastitis, and the pain tore at her. The young woman didn't look at the baby or ask about Amelia. She just approached, took a pink envelope from her purse, left it on the edge of the bed, and said, "Here are 50,000 pesos. Take them and leave. Don't cling on. We'll take care of the rest." Amelia looked at the envelope as if it were a snake, and then the silence was shattered by a crash. The mother-in-law, who had just entered with a cup of tea, threw it to the floor, breaking it in 2. The tea splattered on the young woman's feet, and she furiously screamed, "Do you think this is a market? That you can pay whatever you want and kick someone out as if you were paying for a taxi?" The young woman stepped back, somewhat embarrassed but unrepentant. She shrugged and said, "I thought clarifying things from the beginning would be better for everyone. The child can stay with her. We already agreed." Amelia looked at her mother-in-law, and she returned her gaze. In that instant, both shared a distinct pain. The mother-in-law said no more, went to the kitchen, as if breaking the cup had been enough. The young woman added, "I am a woman, and I don't want her to suffer," she repeated, as if she had done a favor instead of humiliating her. Then the young woman left the house, and the envelope remained on the bed, untouched. At that moment, the baby cried, and Amelia lifted him into her arms. Each movement was a sharp pain in the incision, but she couldn't lie down. The child cried non-stop. There was no milk, only his mother's warmth and the humiliation in the air. That midday, Amelia asked permission to take the baby to the hospital for phototherapy treatment. She couldn't stay home and needed to get out of that environment. Her mother-in-law accompanied her, while Mark did not appear, call, or even text. Amelia waited outside the phototherapy room, watching her tiny son, naked under the blue light, with those glasses protecting his fragile eyes. They were there for almost 2 hours, and in that moment, a dark thought crept into her mind. If it weren't for him, maybe I wouldn't be here. But then, the baby turned his head, looking for her, moving his mouth as if he wanted to tell her something. It was then that Amelia burst into tears for the first time since childbirth. Not a single sound escaped, only tears that ran freely down her face. She took out her cell phone, opened the Notes app, and began to write. Painkiller expenses, 680 pesos. Sterile pads, 380. Oatmeal and milk, 450. Diapers, 860. Taxi to hospital, 1,000 pesos. She saved the note with her son's date of birth as the password. And from that day on, she began to record everything, even what couldn't be measured with money. That night, upon returning, her exhausted mother-in-law spoke to her with concern. Amelia, the child is yellow. Formula won't make him gain weight. Amelia nodded and decided to get her milk back, even if it hurt, even if her nipples were cracked. She couldn't let her son suffer. In the kitchen, the mistress's bag of fruit was still intact. Amelia took it to the alley and gave it to a recycling collector. Then, she washed her hands, turned on the computer, and opened a design program. An unfinished house project was there. She looked at the design for a long time. Then, she opened a new file and named it My Own Home. What incredible strength. If you're inspired by Amelia's determination, give this video a thumbs up. That morning, the persistent spring rain lasted from midnight until the third chime of the nearby church. Amelia had just put the baby down after the first feeding of the day. Still with a fever and cold sweat soaking her back, she was heating water to ease the pain in her breasts, when suddenly, she heard the familiar sound of a motorcycle. It was Mark, who entered without taking off his raincoat. In his hand, he carried a folder folded under a metal clip and a blue pen. He placed it on the table by the bed, where she used to work, but which was now covered with milk and painkillers. Then, in a cold, dry tone, he said, "I want you to sign these papers." Amelia, her hand on her chest, breathing shallowly, asked, "What is this?" "It's a divorce petition, by mutual agreement. I don't want to drag this out any longer." Silence filled the room, broken only by the rain on the roof and the baby's breathing. Amelia looked at Mark. His hair was wet, his shirt clinging to his body, but his eyes showed no doubt. He continued, "I'll tell you straight. Clara and I have plans, and we can't be in this situation with you." The words cut like a knife. Amelia straightened up, put down the hot water bottle, and opened the folder. 2 letter-sized sheets were filled with their names, wedding date, and the reason for divorce, which read, "Voluntary separation." The pen was there, and Amelia felt strong pressure in her chest at Mark's insistence. Her pale hands, with prominent veins, trembled not from fear, but from pain, rage, and cold. She tried to sign, but the stroke veered, leaving a smudge like blood. Then, she dropped the pen, took a deep breath, and looked at him. "I will not sign anything." 3 words, heavier than any plea. Mark shrugged, put the pen away, and left, saying, "As you wish, but you'll only complicate things further." The door closed. The wind moved some paper tissues. Amelia picked them up, lifted the restless baby, and settled him. Then she opened a cushion, buried her face in it, and remained silent, like a stone waiting for the sun to dry. That afternoon, her mother-in-law returned. The neighbors told her about the man with the divorce papers. She saw the folder on the table but didn't ask, only left a packet of oatmeal and said, Eat, so you have more milk." Amelia replied almost voicelessly, "I'm not hungry. Leave it there." Her mother-in-law didn't insist. She tidied the table and went out to the patio to comb her hair. That afternoon, Amelia opened her notes on her cell phone and added, "Divorce papers served to a postpartum wife. Reason: new woman wants legitimacy. Damage: incalculable. Signature: impossible." Since Mark brought the papers, the house had grown cold, like a kitchen in winter without a fire. The mother-in-law continued her routine. She woke up at 5, swept, boiled water, cooked, had oatmeal with salt for breakfast, boiled eggs and vegetables for lunch, sometimes dried fish. She ate alone on the patio, without inviting Amelia, but without closing doors or forbidding anything. Amelia, in the attic, suffered pain when moving. The baby slept poorly, ate little, and vomited. She ran out of painkillers but didn't ask for help. That midday, for the first time after giving birth, Amelia decided to go out to buy food. She checked her old wallet. She only had wrinkled bills, saved during pregnancy for emergencies. She took a 500 peso bill, put it away, and went downstairs. Each step was a sharp pain. She bought oatmeal and a preserved egg at a familiar stall. The vendor, unaware she was a new mother, told her, "You should eat it hot." Amelia nodded, sweat running down her back. Waiting 5 minutes was torture. Her hands trembled so much that she hugged the bag of food to her chest. Upon returning, her mother-in-law saw her, but only commented, "Going out to buy food after giving birth? How tough." Amelia replied, "I'm used to it." Her mother-in-law said no more. Before leaving for the market, she murmured, "My son is stupid. Let him face the consequences." That night, Amelia prepared formula because her breasts, cracked and bleeding, produced no milk. While feeding the baby, she opened her old laptop, slow but functional. She reviewed an old house design, a discarded project. She took a pencil and sketched a new plan. A 25-square-meter apartment for her and her son, with a window to the sun and a safe loft. She didn't know if she would sell it, but it kept her busy. The baby slept after the formula. It was 2:30 in the morning. Outside, the wind whistled, and the sound of a bread vendor faded. Amelia thought, "If I don't get up, who will protect my son from people like his father?" Amelia's strength is truly inspiring. Share your thoughts on her courage in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see more stories of triumph. 5 years earlier, Amelia Brooks was a prominent architect. She designed a series of student houses, minimalist and functional. Her last project before leaving work due to pregnancy was a design for a 3-story building, rejected for not fitting the market. She had it saved in a folder, but that night, she decided to look at it again. Dust covered the corners, but the lines were still precise. She modified the design, adjusting stairs, lighting, and bathrooms, eliminating unnecessary decorations. She worked until dawn, her eyes blurred and her hands trembling. At 6:40 a.m., her phone rang. It was Chloe, a college friend, who promised to hire her if she opened her own company. She asked for the discarded design to renovate some rental houses. Amelia sent the file without correcting the name. Her heart pounded like when she waited for the results of her first ultrasound. At 9, a message from the bank arrived on her cell phone. Account credited with 40,000 pesos for project design. Amelia cried silently, hugging her son. Minutes later, Chloe texted her, "This is just an advance. I paid for the faith you still hold." Amelia saved the message, marked it as a favorite, and titled it, Rebirth. For the first time in months, she checked her bank account. which only had the maintenance cost. Those 40,000 pesos, though few, were hers, earned with her talent, without asking or humiliating herself. That afternoon, she bought a can of better formula milk. Seeing it, her mother-in-law asked, "Where did you get the money?" "I redrew an old design for a friend," Amelia replied. Her mother-in-law said nothing, looked at the can of milk and the baby. That night, for the first time, Amelia ate with her. They didn't speak, but on her plate was hot chicken. Amelia thanked Chloe by email and opened a new folder on her computer named Amelia Brooks Projects. For the first time in months, she didn't put her name as wife or daughter-in-law, but as herself. One afternoon, while calming the baby, she heard Mark's motorcycle. He entered without warning, carrying a dirty plastic bag with a can of cheap formula and small diapers. He threw it on the table. "Here's some for milk and diapers. Don't text me saying the child lacks anything." His voice was cold, but Amelia, with the baby in her arms, didn't respond. She just looked at him with unmoving eyes. Mark, irritated by her silence, pointed. "Do you think you're superior because you earn something with your little drawings? Let's see if you raise the child without my mother." His mother-in-law from the kitchen wanted to speak, but stopped when Mark looked at her. "Mom, she plays the victim, but deep down, she despises us." He looked at the baby and said, "Your mother only knows how to live off others, little one." The child cried. Amelia hugged him, went into the room, and closed the door. The crying resonated like stabs. Her mother-in-law, her hands wet from washing rice, looked at the bag of cheap milk and sighed. "Live however you want. I can't carry this anymore." Mark sat down, checking his cell phone, but his hands trembled. Inside, Amelia sang a lullaby her mother used to sing to her as a child. The baby stopped crying, but his lips remained pressed together. Amelia opened her laptop and tried to work, but she couldn't. She decided it was too much. She wanted to leave and start over. On the 14th day after childbirth, Amelia bathed the baby with guava leaf water. His eyes were opening more now. The incision in her abdomen still hurt. That afternoon, Mark returned, but this time Amelia was waiting for him. As he entered, he placed a thin folder on the table. "Only your signature is missing. Let's not drag this out any longer." Amelia took the paper with an expression of determination. Mark smiled when he saw her. "You changed your mind so fast. You didn't keep the man, but you're keeping the child." Amelia reviewed the document. It didn't ask for assets, house, or alimony, only a handwritten clause. "The child remains with the mother. All decisions regarding his education, care, and life are my responsibility." Mark narrowed his eyes and said, "My son, I'm leaving him with you, so you can be at peace." Finally, Amelia signed. The ink seemed like blood, not from the pen, but from the cut on her fingernail from when she clung to the bed the first night he asked for a divorce. Mark signed and left without looking at the child. His shoes left muddy marks that Amelia did not clean. That night, Amelia packed little: a backpack with clothes, a bag with milk and diapers, the baby's documents, and the laptop wrapped in a towel. Her mother-in-law watched from the kitchen without asking. At 11 o'clock at night, Amelia left with the baby, not wanting to be seen. She took a taxi, hugging her son to her chest. The cold wind seeped through her clothes, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was full of plans, appointments, and numbers. She rented a small room near the market. It was less than 10 square meters, with its own bathroom and a window for morning light. As she put the baby down on a mattress, Amelia looked at the yellowish ceiling and sighed. She sent a message to Chloe. "Officially single and free." Chloe replied, I'm happy for you. You don't need to be better than anyone. Just don't betray yourself." Amelia covered the baby, looking at his calm face, and whispered, "You are the only reason I left there, and you will be the reason I never go back." The room had stained walls and a slippery floor. The ceiling was low, but for Amelia, it was a beginning. A rebirth after almost dying in her marriage. She paid 10,000 pesos a month. She woke up at 5:30 in the morning. She prepared formula for the baby and opened her laptop. Freelance work wasn't much, but Chloe got her clients, designing houses, hotels, cafes, and apartments, without air conditioning or a desk. She used a plastic chair and a folding table. In the mornings she designed. In the afternoons she took him to daycare. The pay was low, but it included free diapers and milk for single mothers. One rainy night, the roof leaked onto the mattress. The child had a fever and foam in his mouth. Desperate, Amelia wrapped him in a blanket and ran 800 meters in the rain to a medical center. When she handed him to the doctor, she was soaked and trembling. When the child stabilized, the doctor asked, "Where is your husband?" "I'm divorced," she replied. "The child is fine, but you must be more careful next time." That night, Amelia didn't sleep, but she was able to send the plan on time. The client praised her detail, and that month she received 40,000 pesos as an advance. She spent 10,000 on rent, 2,000 on diapers, 3,000 on formula, and saved the rest. One sunny morning, Amelia's cell phone rang. Chloe sent her a link. It was an article titled, "A House with Son," designed by a single mother who faced divorce after childbirth. Amelia read, astonished. It was about her. The design of a simple house with climbing plants and a skylight was under construction in Santa Cruz. The photo showed Amelia drawing, with her son, crawling beside her. The comments moved her. "I admire single mothers. A small house with great light." Amelia didn't reply. She just looked at her son, who was drawing a house with two figures, one big and one small. In a downtown cafe, Mark's ex-mistress read the article. She looked at the photo of Amelia and her son, then at her own hand holding a tea. She sent the link to Mark with a message. "You know what? I was wrong." Mark saw the message but didn't reply. In the village, his mother found the article while looking for recipes. She read Amelia's name. She saw the photo and murmured, "She not only raised my grandson, she saved our family's honor." By late June, the heat returned. Amelia worked more. Her designs gained recognition, and a young client commissioned her to renovate a cafe. "Can you work at night?" he asked. "I draw when my son sleeps, from 1 to 4 in the morning," she replied. In a week, she sent a detailed plan and received 300,000 pesos. It was the first large payment she had received in a year. Without thinking further, she called the landlord. "Hello, I want to end the contract early. Thank you for all your support, but I need more space." Moving was simple. 3 bags, one with clothes, another with baby things, another with the laptop. The new place had a balcony for climbing plants and a space for drawing. After Amelia's departure, Mark lived carelessly. He moved in with his mistress to an elegant apartment. But 2 months later, his company fired him for abuse of authority and favoritism. Jobless and without income, luxurious dinners turned into instant noodles. The mistress, seeing the change, left him, leaving a note on the table. "It was a mistake to get involved with you. I only wasted my time." Mark returned to his mother's house with timid steps. She didn't hug him. She just said, "You lost the most valuable thing you had by seeking beauty. And look at you now. You have nothing." That night, Mark looked at old photos of his son. He tried to call Amelia, but there was no connection. He slept in the room where their wedding photo used to hang. Now it was an empty space. One hot Saturday, Amelia and her son, now over a year old, ate at a cafe. Mark watched them from afar, with a red wooden toy in his hand. The child saw him and asked, "Mommy, who is that man?" Amelia looked at Mark. Their eyes met, without greetings or tears, just silence. She squeezed her son's hand and didn't answer. Mark left, leaving the toy unopened. That night, Mark wrote, "I want to see my son. You can't take that right from me." Amelia read the message but didn't reply. She put her son to bed, feeling his breath, and whispered, "I haven't lost anything. I have my son, and I have everything." One afternoon, as Amelia opened the door with her son, Mark appeared at the gate, with imported milk, an expensive toy, and a thick envelope. His eyes, empty but hopeful, pleaded. The child, seeing him, hid behind his mother. "Mommy, who is that man?" Mark trembled, his eyes reddened. But Amelia, serene and calm, told him, "That man was someone I trusted, but he disappointed me." Mark tried to get up, but his legs failed him. Amelia entered with her son, without looking back. One Sunday, at a workshop for women on rebuilding life after divorce, Amelia spoke for the first time. "Daylight and my husband asked for a divorce. I ran in the rain without a penny. I drew my first plan in a room without a table. I moved forward, and one day, my son asked me who his father was. That day, I knew I didn't learn to forgive. I learned not to need to forgive." Silence filled the room. As she left, someone touched her shoulder. Amelia turned. It was her son, looking at her with a smile. "Thank you, son. Because of you, I don't need to hate anyone." Amelia's story is not fiction. It represents many women who know how to endure, but also how to rise. She didn't seek revenge. She only protected her son and herself. When Mark knelt, his son didn't recognize him. And that day, he learned that sometimes second chances don't exist, and that we must seize them when life gives you one. Lesson learned. Amelia's incredible journey teaches us about resilience, self-worth, and the power of a mother's love. It shows that true strength lies not in clinging to what's broken, but in finding the courage to rebuild, brick by brick, a life filled with dignity and purpose. Sometimes the greatest victories are not about seeking revenge, but about rising above the pain to create a future where you and your loved ones can truly thrive, proving that your value is inherent and not dependent on anyone else's recognition. What aspects of Amelia's transformation resonated most deeply with you? Share your thoughts and continue the conversation.